Welcome back to the Free Spirits Podcast. I'm Lars Miller, joined by my co-host David Gonzalez. Before we get started here today, if you're enjoying the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we are joined by Ben Larson, CEO of Vertosa, a key player in the emulsion tech powering many of the top THC beverage brands that you've seen on shelves, from the Collective Project to Wunder to Keef to Pabst High Seltzer. Vertosa's been behind the curtain of many iconic drinks. Welcome, Ben. How are you today?
I'm doing great, all things considered.
So you've been in the cannabis space for a long time now. I believe your first foray into the space was Gateway Incubator, and now you're leading Vertosa through obviously this huge wave of the infused beverage innovation. So looking back, what was the moment that you realized that infused cannabis beverages could be a serious business?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think anyone that was in the space 10 years ago, like I am, I celebrate my 10-year anniversary this year.
Congrats, you made it.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, but we observed the big investment from Constellation into canopy growth to the tune of $4 or $5 billion, and this was back in 2017, I believe. And at that time, I can't really remember the order of operations, but there was a company out of Colorado called Ebu, and they had a little bit of an infusion technology, and there was a few brands that had been spun up around it in California. The beverage category really did start in the regulated space, primarily Colorado and California. And Canopy acquired that company for like $300 million. It was a really big acquisition. There was a lot more in there besides the infusion tech. There was a bunch of like strain genetics and whatnot. But Constellation, infusion tech, like the kind of narrative started writing itself. Also in our portfolio at Gateway, we had a company called Somatic, which was this beautiful cold brew coffee. It was low dose and it was an incredible product. I remember hosting a podcast and just drinking it and feeling a little bit elevated, a little bit energized, and just realizing that this could really be a thing. Just it creates a new modality for feeling a little bit elevated and different than smoking and vaping. And so this was pretty early on, obviously before I started Vertosa. And in that journey with Somatic, we saw how challenging it was for them to create a consistent product, to create a product where the emulsion was stable and homogenized and did so over time. And so we got to go on that journey with them, with a number of different operators in the space. And when it came time for me to raise our next fund, we started thinking about what did the industry really need? Because none of our companies that we had invested in so far, sorry guys, were going to become $1 billion company. And that's really what venture capital is built on. Like, you need to create unicorns, and none of them have become unicorns, right? And so we decided like the supply chain really needed focusing. Like, we needed to scale the supply chain. And so we started looking at infusion technology, alternative cannabinoid development, so be it biosynthesis, chemical synthesis, so kind of foreshadowing where we're at today. And in doing all that, mid-raise, I met my co-founder, Harold Hahn. And, he was just the right person with the right background at the right time. And there was a lot of other dynamics going on in the space. Basically, I was kind of getting burnt out managing a portfolio through the cannabis industry. I think I cared too much. Most venture capitalists get accused of not having feelings and being just money-driven. And I'm just not that person. And so given the opportunity, I basically pitched myself as the CEO and Harold being the scientist, and that was back in 2018 when we got started.
And who ended up being your guys' first client at Vertosa?
Our first client was Somatic.
I was going to ask if it was Somatic.
Yeah. It was a great test case. In fact, I hand built our first lab in a walk-in closet in their licensed facility in San Francisco. So like, everyone talks about the garage like startup. We were a closet in a garage, literally. We didn't have to stay there long. An opportunity arose where we got to quickly apply for a license in Oakland. And that was like a 2-month process for us. So really lucked out on that. And that kind of just started the process. But, in that time, we were also infusing other things. Like, we were dabbling with edibles. We had done a bunch of topicals. Another company actually that's still around, I think it's our longest running client, is called Quim, and they do lubricants and other female oriented products. And yeah, just the beverage aspect was so interesting. We would, just to build interest, we'd go to like Christmas parties in San Francisco and set up an infusion bar. And we were seeing often people in their 60s and 70s trying cannabis for the very first time simply because it was in a beverage format. And they were having a great experience. Obviously, we were sticking with low dose, often like 2.5 milligrams per serving. But they were calling the host the next day, being like, "What was that product? That was the best event ever." And I think it was at that time I was pretty much sold. I'm like, okay, we're all in. Nothing's going to convince me that this isn't going to be a big thing. And believe me, the cannabis industry tried to convince me for many years until the hemp opportunity really kind of arose.
Ben, you're one of the few people I've met and talked to that kind of inverted that order of operations, meaning you went from managing a portfolio, being a mentor, incubator on the venture capital side, to being, you're saying to yourself, actually, I want to be an operator full time and take on all that stress and all of that ups and downs, and then have people invest money in my companies now. So it's quite the change of, of a landscape for you. And so was it Beverages pulled you in there and you're like, if no one's going to build this and I have to? Was it like an opportunity that was there for you to seize? Like, what made you give up and jump into the grind of being an operator when you had the luxury of, taking a step back and watching these brands, take it on themselves?
I'm predisposition to kind of take like a radical like ownership over anything that
Okay.
I, and so like as a venture capitalist, if you invest in 20 companies, it's supposed to be a numbers game, really. Like you want to leverage your network, you want to care, give advice, but really it's a numbers game. But for me, it's like I had like 20 babies that I really cared about. And it was really painful to not have more control, to be honest. And honestly, when you've seen a lot and you give people advice and you can only guide them so you can lead a horse to water, right? And that became immensely painful in this very volatile industry. And so I've said this a lot over the years. I'm like, pardon my French, but I'm like, if anyone's going to fuck up a company, it might as well be me. And, that's been my mentality. And I think the benefit is that I've had this chip on my shoulder ever since I made the transition. I'm like, all that advice I gave over the years, and it wasn't just Gateway. Before that, I was doing Founder Institute where I touched, thousands of startups around the world. And I'm like, every piece of advice I've given is going to be invalidated if I don't make this company a success.
Sure.
And so come hell or high water, I'm going to make this company happen. And I think that's been my driving force this whole time. And it has gotten me through some pretty hard times. The cannabis industry hasn't been easy.
Yeah. And I think that's a big reason why there are so few people who have extensive operator backgrounds hop into this industry. If you were like an intelligent, rational person, you'd look at this and say, why on earth would I go in this industry that changes every day, that has low margins, tax up the ass? A normal, rational person would look at this and say, that sounds like a nightmare. But you, on the other hand, said, other people's challenges is my opportunity. One of the questions I wanted to ask you about, one of my favorite activities is going on LinkedIn and seeing people argue about how THC drinks get made. If I ever want to get a bunch of likes or impressions or comments on a post, I will talk about the origins of an emulsion. So one of the questions I had for you is, how do you address that public discourse? Because there's a lot of people who claim the emulsions come from THCA, it comes from overseas, it's overly synthetic. Why do you think that perception exists? And then the other question I have for you is, on your website, you guys talk about this. It's a proprietary, patented, and patent pending technology all go into making this emulsions. Is there a bit of like an IP element there that you're looking to protect? And why is there this perception in the public that something like things like emulsions have this kind of black box secrecy to how they get made?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And look, we're very open about how we make our emulsions. And that was part of our brand. In fact,
Yeah, I have your book.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we wrote a book. Like we just tell people how to do it. Harold's entire background, Harold's our chief scientist, and he's a PhD in surface chemistry. So his entire career has been focused at the interface of oil and water. And that's what our specialty is. It's like you're taking a highly viscous oil, extracting it from a plant and trying to get it to suspend in water indefinitely. And like I told Harold in the very early days, I'm like, no offense, but emulsions aren't rocket science. And we need to build a company that basically believes that. And it's like, we're going to throw the book of science at it and we're going to science the hell out of it. But really, where we've built the company is on the service and the knowledge and basically our radical ownership over our customers' products. And so that's what we've built the company around. Now, we came to find out that it was actually a lot more complicated than we had anticipated. So we do have some patents around certain formulas, but we always also believe that it wasn't a one size fits all technology. There's a lot of companies out there that have an emulsion technology and they believe that they're just going to scale that and apply it to everything. We don't do that. We have multiple formulations that are used for in different instances. And what people need to understand at the end of the day is that an emulsion is a vehicle and it's a multi-step process of like, what are you going to put inside that vehicle and what is that vehicle going to go into? And each one of those steps like creates a different system. And so you need to understand if you're going to create a stable system that delivers on a particular experience consistently, like you need to have really tight handles on all those things. And so in that, there are certain things that you patent. There's certain things that, well, are patent pending. Mm-hmm. There's also trade secrets and then just general kind of book of knowledge that we have. And so it's a whole combination of things. We try to basically educate constantly about it. And that's how I engage in the discourse is like, it's a never ending like stream of like opportunities to educate people, but we do our best. And if for anything, we try to make sure that people know that we're a resource where they can come to us. We'll give them an honest answer. And that is oftentimes appreciated, not always. You know, there are many people that are benefiting from the narratives that they are kind of putting out into the marketplace, and they will persist in doing so. But our job is to make sure that our voice gets louder and stronger and more trusted.
Absolutely.
So, I was doing some research, and then, you and I've spoken with Harold as well in the past. Something that's come up multiple different times is that you guys like to talk about designing experiences as it pertains to infused products. So you're not just delivering an active ingredient to the client, you're designing that experience overall. So what does that look like in practice when you're working with brands? And then also with that, how do you help clients think about onset, offset, and then other user outcomes beyond simply this has 5 milligrams of THC in it?
Wow. There's a maybe you don't intend it to be this way, but there's a lot in that question, right? And there's where we're at today, where we were at when we first started, and where we're going. But I guess most simply put, in the cannabis industry, we've always talked about the entourage effect and how it can lead to different experiences, right? Now, right now, when you go, especially in the beverage category, if you go to the store shelves, you're going to see a lot of THC, maybe a little bit of CBD, maybe the occasional THCV or CBC, right? It's like, why are we doing that? Because we generally believe that those other cannabinoids have some synergistic effect, but what is it doing? And so right now, our job is to make sure that we facilitate the delivery of those ingredients. And so as complicated as you want to get, if you want to get like a beautiful live rosin off the plant and put into a beverage and make sure it's stable, like we can do that. We've done it in California, in Canada, less so in the hemp market because live rosin hemp, we'll just leave it there. Anyways, the next stage for us is really like being able to kind of tailor those experiences and leaning on research and actual like human studies to really understand what those ingredients need to be to deliver on unique experiences. And this can be hotly debated for, till the cows come home, as they say. Even within our own team, you'll have Harold be like, and actually he might be technically proving this right now, that you might even have slight experiential differences between emulsion types based on the emulsifiers that are used and how they deliver cannabinoids into the bloodstream. And then you have other people that say, well, I don't see any difference even with different cannabinoid combinations. And so there's a lot that goes in here, like how perceptible are we? How different are our endocannabinoid systems? But all this to say, we're entering this period where mood modulation has been identified as the next mega category of beverage. And I think almost everyone, not everyone, is kind of out there like banging on the computer, like, hoping to get something out of it. And things that are coming out are different cannabinoid combinations. You get mushroom beverages, dopamine generating beverages, and they're trying to get to something. But what they aren't getting is the whole combination of it all and how it delivers on a particular targeted experience that can be associated with a brand. And so that's what I believe the future is. That's what we're kind of driving towards. Like, how do we use all the ingredients available to us to deliver on a brand experience. Because at the end of the day, consumers repurchase experiences. Most people don't love Jaeger bombs, or most people don't love Fireball, but it's associated with an experience, and that's when they go back to it. And it's usually in a certain environment that they do it. And so it's like, how do we start thinking about how we build brands in that fashion?
Love that answer. That's something that I started to see a lot of in the early days of the Minnesota market. Not just beverage, but on the edible side, it was, if everyone is just doing 5 milligrams of THC, how do we possibly start to differentiate ourselves? And so the next wave was then your minor cannabinoids. You started to see CBG, CBN, CBC come through. Next wave was, okay, if we can get away with that, can we pack in some adaptogens, tropics, some functional products? And all of a sudden, there's this cornucopia of products out there that are all trending towards, I love the moniker you used, mood modulation. I always called it more of like a functional type of beverage. They're looking for, or people are looking for some sort of outcome, right? And to your point, if it's just a 5 milligram, 10 milligram straight THC, you're out in a social setting, that experience as compared to something like having THCV, lion's mane, other CBG in a drink, like that's a wildly different experience. The other thing that catches my attention quite a bit is how challenging it is from an industry perspective to actually get that effect to work consistently across different types of people. And so one of the things that
or
comes
even with the same person.
like, for instance, if I have a mango that day, I didn't realize that like mangoes have terpenes in them. Terpenes enhance the effects of certain cannabinoids. So then all of a sudden, I'm way higher than I want it to be. And there's little things like that just in the diet. And so one of the things that's coming to mind for me is I have the luxury of being able to work with a lot of D2C brands. And so I get to see reviews, feedback from people. How is that product received? What I love about what you're saying is you're hyper focused on what's that actual outcome you're driving towards. There are so many products out there where people just have wildly different experiences from end to end for the same product. And it always makes somebody wonder, like, is that an emulsion problem? Is it a physiology problem, to your point, different endocannabinoid systems? But all of it gets me thinking, how is a company like Vertosa trying to solve a challenge like this? Because I looked at the site and I see from a product's perspective, there's the one liquid emulsion. And so my question is, as this industry is really starting to develop here now, how are you guys accommodating all these different variables that factor into the actual experience somebody has with a beverage?
Great question. I will start by saying that our website is very out of date. It's been on our to-do list to refresh the website for a couple of years now, and I swear to God, I'm prioritizing it. But I'll just say we've been doing a lot of work, Harold primarily, but in the team, the R&D team, working with other entities like Johns Hopkins. We do a lot of integration with and understanding how they do pharmacodynamic studies. So in kind of drug delivery, you think about pharmacokinetics, which is how drugs progress through the bloodstream, right? And then pharmacodynamics is actually the experience that happens because of that, right? And so they're kind of like two different things. One's more directly quantitative, and the other is more qualitative in nature, but you're trying to drive towards quantitative results. So it's like you can have objective kind of experience based on like what you're doing. And so what we've been doing is refining that process over time and working with different research groups that have maybe targeted studies. And we've just been compiling the knowledge. And so we don't generally sell this as a service right now, but the body of work that we're building is kind of what I'm excited about the future, right? And the three legs of the stool that I see is one, understanding the various ingredients and all the research that is out there. There is the actual measuring of the experience and understanding how to do pharmacodynamics in like a reliable and efficient way. It's, as you know, it's like product testing in cannabis is very hard because you have one product and then you get to wait a day or more before you do it. In fact, you should probably wait a week if you really want all the cannabinoids to be primarily, for the most part, out of the system. And then the final aspect is like delivering it. And that's where we we've already solved for that for the most part. Is like, all right, we can put all this into a single ingredient and make sure that we are consistently delivering at this at the same rate every time, right? And that's critical. Making sure that whatever you put in there is still in there. That's also a tough part. Various cannabinoids ingredients oxidize at different rates, and so you need to protect them. But it's like putting all these pieces together, and so we've been building that over time, kind of in reverse of what I just said. Yeah, I mean, there's great thinkers out there that we also get to work with. We're doing some projects with companies like 1906, where Peter thinks a lot about this, like how these ingredients have synergistic effects, and so we get to lean on them a bit and let them dream and just make sure that we can deliver on the ingredient itself, right?
Got it.
Yeah. So as someone who, as you mentioned earlier, you worked as a startup accelerator founder and now you're a product tech CEO, how do you think about capital efficiency, in the current cannabis climate and, as capital becomes, more conservative, where are you focusing and doubling down on as you continue to grow?
Spent 2022 and 2023 laser focus on operational efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Raised a fair amount of venture capital in the years leading up to that, understanding that we had to seed the market, build the market. But the reality started to set in, especially with the downturn that started happening in 2022. Just knew that like surviving was winning, right? That was kind of the mantra in the cannabis industry. You survive, you win.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, well, that's a pretty, not a simple task, but it's a straightforward task, right? And that's what we did. We literally had I don't know if I've said this on air before, but we had a team of 40 plus people, and in a very short amount of time, we went down to 19.
Wow.
And our business didn't slow down. Like we've built the business year over year since we've started. And with that team of 19, you had these opportunities in these expansion and contraction where you add new people to the team, new talent.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's a home run, but when you contract, like you concentrate your concentration of A players, right? And
Yep.
the team that we had coming out of that period, it was just an amazing core to start building around. And so as we built the systems and as we built the efficiency, the business started to grow, and we started to realize that we could serve the demand without adding that many more heads. And this is before all this like talk about AI and replacing people, all that kind of stuff, which I love AI, don't get me wrong. And then, we got to a point where the beverage industry was really starting to unlock, and business all of a sudden go into that growth mode of like doubling year over year again. And it took a little bit, but finally I'm like, hey guys, I think we should start hiring again. And so we allowed ourselves to feel what the kind of the extent of that capacity is. And I'm grateful for those hard years where it really taught us about like what is a Vertosa employee, like where should we like build systems before hiring people. And like we're very fortunate, like when you surround yourselves with like cannabis operators for so many years, like you don't take it for granted. Like we feel very fortunate and very privileged to be in a place where we get to talk about profitability and cash efficiency and all that kind of stuff. And when I'm reporting to my board every month, those are the metrics that I'm focusing on. Like how efficient are we being with our team?
And I love that answer. One of the things that came to mind just listening to that is I had talked to a few private equity venture capital people, and I had asked them like, what's missing in this THC beverage category that's preventing you from jumping in? And I thought I was going to get stuff around risk, regulation, etc. The resounding answer I got back from a lot of people was a lack of operational excellence, which is a very counterintuitive thing to think about for like a burgeoning new market. But to your point, cannabis is one of those rare industries where it truly is a battle of attrition. And sometimes consolidation can be your smartest, best long-term growth move. And I think so many people get caught up chasing that revenue that might be coming in, but it's like if you're not actually managing that cash well and setting yourself up long-term and being realistic about all this stuff, that inevitably it can only last so long. And so where I'm going with this is when I look at your roster of clients on the beverage side, if I had to assemble an A list of operators, the majority of them would be the clients that you have today. Collective Project, Keef, Pabst, Day Trip, Wunder, like that list goes on and on and on and on. And so I'm wondering, as Vertosa has evolved, grown, scaled over time, are you finding yourself now being more selective with the types of projects and companies and operators that you work with? Are you saying no to companies, or is this still one big tent and everybody's invited?
I would say more the latter than the former. A lot of that goes back to my passion of helping founders find their way. I don't want to create a company that says, "Oh, come back when you're bigger." That seems like a real asshole move. Now, when you're focusing on operational efficiency, it's a balance. And so, do we say yes to every cool project that we used to? No, right? It's like no, we need to apply our R&D resources to like our prioritized projects. So no, we can't do your 12 cannabinoids into, half a kilogram order, right? No offense to anyone that we're talking to right now, but so we got a little bit more selective, but we try to keep, our price points low. And my team will understand. Like I'm an advocate for the small player in our industry, and so I'm always pushing our team, like, could we like pre-package some stuff and make it shelf stable so that we can just like sling it off the shelf? Do we think about it differently? Can we think about this as like milk jugs that we're just like put on like a whole D2C, like platform or something like that? We haven't fully executed on that, but like, those are the things that I really like to do to make sure that we can get people into our ecosystem early on and then have them grow with us instead of having them graduate to us.
Sure.
Which a number do. Like because of the opportunity that hemp created, there was a lot of small regional emulsion providers that sprung up around the country. And, identifying them all as competitors was like a fool's errand. And so what we started to think of about it is like the on-ramp, right? So it's like, okay, that's great. People can get started. And when they become relevant, when they hit our radar, they'll probably be getting to that point where they're needing scale and reliability. I think the standard turnaround time on emulsion was typically like 2 to 3 weeks from most providers. I'm like, make it 2 to 3 days. And I remember Mikey, my COO, asked me, he's like, "Are we trying to be the Amazon Prime of emulsion?" I'm like,
that'd be great.
Yes. I'm like, that's what the cannabis and hemp industry needs. Like, the people run around with their hair on fire. And like, we don't want to impede their business. We want to support their growth. And so that was kind of the mindset, right? And yeah, I mean, as we grow into the future, like I do want to continue to invest in those cool burgeoning projects, because again, that's my love. I love to create, and I love to help create that path for people.
Awesome. Do you have any projects in the pipeline that you can speak to that you're excited about, or is all this stuff under closed lips here?
Look, I think I just have to bucket into exactly what you're saying. People are looking for ways to differentiate, and whether you're big or small, when it's the big companies, like, oh, how do we create premium products? What is premium in the space? And I get to like really educate on, like, well, you can go this way. You can invest a lot in actual like R&D and proving that you have a differentiated experience, and we can give you marketing claims if you do this level of study. Or be truer to the plant. Start with the plant and then build a flavor profile around it, like our friends at like Sheesh and Emerald Hour in Canada, or Arnie's here in California. They did this beautiful live resin 100 milligram beverage, and man, those things have been flying off the shelves because it creates a more robust experience. So it's stuff like that I get really excited about. But like I was saying earlier, it's just being able to deliver on that and create differentiated experiences for people. And I do firmly believe that's the future. As we find ourselves in this period of time where we get to talk about profitability, making sure that we're putting all that towards building the future. And yeah, hopefully when we check in, maybe in the next year or something like that, then I'm actually talking about this in a less ambiguous way. But yeah, that's what we're building.
I love it. So, we were talking offline about politics and things like that, and you've been a strong voice in policy circles, in CIA, CBA, CABA now. What conversations are going on that you've been a part of that you think are most important to this category right now, other than obviously the potential legal situation going on in Texas?
Yeah. It's a good question. Look, it's been a very active legislative session, and we chose the paths that we chose, ourselves and others. And I think what we all need to do come summer is sit down and reassess where the game board sits. I have a very long lens on this industry and things that I advocate. No one can accuse me of being a capitalist, like in my decision making, because we infuse beverages. We also infuse gummies. We infuse cannabis. We infuse hemp. We're in Canada. If I really wanted to maximize my capital opportunity, I'd be like, free the plant everywhere, right? But I don't think that's the responsible conversation. I think regulators and legislators and consumers and everyone needs to be a part of this conversation. And if you're merely trying to protect your profits for your contingent of type of operator, and I can say this for both sides, if you're a DTC hemp platform that has every form factor, or if you're a California licensed dispensary, if you're merely fighting for your capital benefit, like you're losing the narrative. Like, we are building the future of like a mainstream cannabis category. And we've talked about regulatory convergence in different venues. All I gotta say is, like, we all need to sit down and just realize where the conversation is at and understand that the regulators know what's going on, the legislators know what's going on, the consumers are confused as hell. And at the end of the day, it's about the consumer, right? And so how do we build the future that we all need? And we need to come to the middle, and it's going to be painful. It's going to be super painful for a lot of folks, but we have to build the future. And, I wrote this article series early last year about how regulated cannabis needed to allow low dose THC beverage go. Just let it go. Let it go do its thing. Let it get its foothold on store shelves and build access and normalization for THC, and the rest will follow. And that was an relatively easy sell, because low dose THC beverages don't sell well in dispensaries, right? Look at the top 10 beverage products being sold in California on Headset. It's 100 milligram beverages every time, all 10, maybe 9. It's a lot harder of a sell on the hemp side that is feeling like it's having things taken away perpetually. But that's because hemp has changed over the years. And I know beverage is hard to let go because it is a good tip of the spear. Let's call a spade a spade. But at the end of the day, we do need to start looking at things from a product type perspective and build individual rule sets for those product types. And what we've done at Kaba, and we've caught a lot of flack for, is being very explicit about what that is for low dose beverage. And if you have a problem with it, then do it for gummies, do it for vapes, do it for flower, like, do it. I'm not seeing a lot of bills out there to vote on besides beverage bills, right? And I understand, like, the existential threats of these bans, like, but we can't just block bans forever. They're trying to ban for a reason. There's like a visceral driver to why these bans are occurring. And at the end of the day, it's everything that we said. It's hemp is cannabis. This is how people feel about cannabis. This is the strength of that stigma, and we need to break the stigma. We need to find our way through. And so this is that long lens that I'm talking about. It's like, we need to make some sacrifices in order to get where we need to go.
Would you say that you're seeing more traction being gained in some sort of federal conversation, or is it being pushed back to the states mostly?
Look, I mean, there's this perpetual push of giving the states the right to make their own decisions, but it's a structural thing. So you need some structure from the federal level. And what we as an industry should be hoping for is definition and permissibility, and then letting the states decide. Because what that will allow us to do is maintain interstate commerce, right? If we define what hemp is and what can be legally defined as hemp, and then the states decide, then we can still like kind of move things about, right? And so when we look at the Farm Bill, when we look at appropriations, like bifurcating the hemp plant and being like, this is what's industrial and this is what's destined for hemp cannabinoid extraction, I think is an important thing. Like, intoxicating hemp has really, pained the material side of the hemp industry. And that needs to be taken care of. And then when you get to that, the Farm Bill does not have all the mechanisms necessary to adequately regulate hemp cannabinoids. It can define it, but the other agencies need to get involved. And so another critical piece of that structure is the FDCNA, right? Federal Drug Cosmetics Act, or Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, or something like that. I'm messing it up. Anyways, in there needs to be a cannabinoid section to kind of give itself its own realm. And then
Mhm.
once you have that, then the other agencies can do their pieces, or we can kick it down to the states. But like right now, there's a bunch of nothingness, and we've experienced this through every part of every iteration of hemp. Right? We've been talking about this in CBD forever. It's like the FDA has provided no guidelines, or some guidelines, but generally no guidelines for putting CBD into food.
Mhm.
You know, it's pretty innocuous at this point, right? Like nothing's falling apart. You could probably say the same about THC, but I digress. We get those things. We just get a little bit of structure through that, and then we amplify states' rights. Like I think we'll have the building blocks that we'll need, and these conversations are being had. But what can't persist is the status quo.
Right.
And it might persist. Like we might get a status quo of the farm bill for another God knows how long, but that is not long-term solution. And so again, people need to be coming to the table with solutions and stop complaining so goddamn much.
Preach, preach.
I'm with you. Or just fear mongering is the other horrible one.
Yeah.
Or yeah, making boogeymen out of the wrong people, right? It's just like, and we catch a lot of arrows at Kaba for being responsible voices in the room. It's like yes, we've made friends with alcohol, but you know what? Do you want to be shut out of that conversation and have them make rules without us in the room?
Right. Well, I think
You
it's
know,
a really important point. Well, the first thing I wanted to say was the whole CBD and food conversation is so counterintuitive to me. I remember sitting with my business partner as a GMP certified manufacturer, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I'm getting audited today." I was like, "What's that like?" So I just stuck around. The person's going through, and he's like making THC edibles in front of this person, and like they leave a note that's like, "By the way, the FDA does not allow CBD or THC in edibles," and he's like, "But I'm good." They're like, "Yeah." It's such a strange, like weird spot to be in. But I think what you're saying around Kaba marketplaces, regulation. I think it's important for people to understand the history of how marketplaces really develop. And they come in certain cycles, right? You have your Wild West, your unregulated, anything goes, and it's a gold rush. Everybody goes for it. Inevitably, regulation always happens. Regulatory capture happens. And it's a very, if you are impacting other marketplaces, which hemp is, it's not just one.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like AT&T, Bell Labs going after all these small networks. Like this is big cannabis and big tobacco, and even a little bit, actually not big tobacco, big alcohol. You could say tobacco a little bit as well. You have these two massive entities. One's 300 billion, the other's 30 billion. If you're coming in and eating their lunch, they're going to find ways to make things tough on you. They have regulatory capture. They'll make rules, laws, things in general difficult for you. So instead of trying to fight that and take on the incumbent, the way to actually survive, which is what you've been doing for 7 years now for Vertosa, is how do we work with these people and actually stay focused on the long-term goal, which is proliferation and access of these products. Because the other thing you got to think about is these marketplaces, these industries, they have invested all of this capex in moving heavy beverages all around the country. Do you want to front that bill? Like, do you want to subsidize all the infrastructure that it takes to actually get that product from point A to point B? Probably not. So are there going to be some concessions? Yes. Are they going to be painful? Yes. It is a turbulent marketplace, but I think people need to take a step back and ultimately just ask yourselves, like, what's the alternative? The alternative is these places, like Texas, these other states where you're just shut out. And is that really like the end goal that you want? So I guess my question for you, Ben, is you're in all these acronym groups. It's like 4 or 5 of them. What would your, as Ian would say, what does your nirvana look like, in 2-3 years for this category? Is it THC beverages everywhere? Is it the grocery store, the C stores? Is it at a hardware store, the liquor store? Like what does a realistic nirvana look like for you and for Vertosa?
2 to 3 years, you said.
I mean, you can go 10 if you're feeling aesthetic. It's up to you.
I mean, look, 10 is complete normalization, and cannabis is everywhere, and it's kind of been exploded into its many different components. I think the biggest challenge with cannabis, as we know, is that there are so many applications. And in Western culture, we are so used to bucketing things into very kind of simplistic, like just paradigms. And in Eastern culture, right, like medicine is very different. Like you walk into a pharmacist, so to speak, and they pull out all these drawers, and there's mushrooms and roots and weeds and put it all into a package and be like, here, make a tea three times a day for 2 weeks. You'll be cured, right? Like that freaks out most Westerners. So that's what we're up against. And that's why, like, to your point, we have all these prevailing winds from like pharma and very much tobacco. I mean, like, there's some big Altria's very much invested.
Mhm.
BAT, Japan Tobacco, I've even seen like sniffing around. I don't know if they've done any action. Anyways, we have all these forces, all these interests, and basically they look at this as one big like petri dish right now. Like we are the little cultures that are like trying to build and expand, and at some point they're gonna be like, oh yeah, let's pick that one and do something with it. So we're trying to we're fighting against that, really. We're in the petri dish phase. But we play our cards right from a long-term perspective. And I'll start with the 10 years. It's like you build that normalization. We've talked about the power of beverage and how it's converted very like Republican folks who had never touched weed, and all of a sudden they're dropping alcohol and reaching for the THC beverage. Like, that is such a massive leap forward that we've made in the last few years because of this category. And so thinking about how things accelerate, not to mention just like aging out of generations and new generations coming along, like this is going to happen just through sheer patience. This will happen. Like, when we all are old people that, people are screaming to get us to age out of like Congress, like we'll be talking about, THC, and everyone's going to be talking about all the other psychedelics. So like, it's just going to happen. But like, that is the future that I see, is like just true normalization and people being able to leverage cannabis for the right reasons without the stigma. And maybe there's still some stigma around certain dosages and certain form factors, but we will have become accustomed to kind of thinking about those different categories, just the same as alcohol has. You can powderize alcohol and you can put alcohol in a ton of different things, but we consume alcohol in a beverage format. Like, we need to understand that. It's like, we can't keep everything everywhere all at once forever. And so we need to think of it in a more nuanced fashion. And so whatever the time scale is some sort of gradation of that, but I do feel an acceleration to it from a high level perspective.
Well, that's great. I hope that comes to fruition. I'd like to end the conversation on a lighter note. You've hosted podcasts, built brands, gave a policy as we've discussed, mentored dozens of founders. What is personally keeping you motivated right now?
This is the biggest change the world will ever experience. Like this, I can't imagine doing anything else, because this is my legacy that my kids will remember me by. They're literally watching me build not only a company, but like an industry along with all of you, right? And I believe, like, I named Gateway because, yes, the double entendre, to kind of take a negative term and turn it positive, a gateway to opportunity. But also it is a gateway. It's a gateway to opening your mind, to like questioning the built environment that we've all been forced to live because of the few, right? Like, taking it back to Anslinger and Nixon and all these people who had a bent on something else, not cannabis, but cannabis was a tool of a way to holding down communities. And if we lift that veil and make everyone realize and question our built environment, then that's when we are truly liberated and able to think about things in a different way. And I think that inherently is the big opportunity.
It's a powerful answer. It's one of the things I do love most about this industry, is the passion around the different founders I get to talk to and everything. So thank you so much, not only for that answer, but for joining us on the podcast today. For anyone listening who wants to learn more about Vertosa or follow your work, where should we send them?
Oh man, I'm pretty findable on LinkedIn these days, but you can also go to vertosa.com.
Well, thank you so much. And to all the listeners, remember, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Continue bringing you conversations such as these with industry leaders. And until next time, cheers.